Broadcasting worldwide from the beautiful hill country in Texas, this is OneRadioNetwork.com. Well, a very pleasant good morning to you. This is Patrick Timpone. It is a Tuesday. Yeah, I figured that out. 16 June 2015. And this is OneRadioNetwork.com. Good morning. The life work of John Taylor Gatto, who's one of the all-time great thinkers on self-education and author of Dumbing Us Down, the underground history of American education and weapons of mass destruction. You've probably heard of John Taylor Gatto. Well, he had a stroke some time ago, and he's really unable. I'll talk to David Rodriguez more about it. But Mr. Rodriguez is republishing it, this seminal work on education. David Rodriguez is a very passionate advocate and for empowerment and respect in education, as Mr. Gatto was. And he moved to South Korea. He taught English, and he is conversant in Montessori schools, democratic schools, homeschooling, cooperatives, and unschooling. And we're going to learn about what Mr. Gatto's work was about and why this book is important, and it's coming out in a month or so. And so let's say good morning in San Jose to Mr. David Rodriguez. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Patrick. Glad to be with you today.
Yeah, it's nice to be with anybody today, David. So you're special to be here.
I agree.
It's nice to be above ground and taking nourishment. It's good. Well, Mr. Gatto, it's give folks who really don't know who John Taylor Gatto is before we get into his work and your work and the book. Who is this man? And he's still with us, right?
He is. Yeah, he'll be 80 in December. And he is one of the, if not the largest voice in education over the last 30, 40 years to come out and really call forced schooling or public education what it is. And he goes through and just gives personal stories of what happened to him over 30 years of teaching in the New York City schools. And he was teaching 8th grade, and in 1991 he got the New York State Teacher of the Year, and between 1989 and 1991, he got the New York City Teacher of the Year award. And this was not by the goodwill and insight by the city, but because of so much high productive work which his students produced. And actually in 1990, he was the runner-up for State Teacher of the Year, and in 89, he was a finalist. So he was just having his application sent in by his students, by the community. And one of the interesting projects is he doesn't much like John Lennon, but the fact that his students really enjoy John Lennon, and the city was considering this memorial called Strawberry Fields in New York, and it got rejected, and Yoko Ono was sad and fans were sad, but the students of his got together and said, hey, Mr. Gatto, what can we do about this? And he instructed them, and they took action, and they built a committee of 5,000 and had the city reverse the decision by writing individual letters to the commissioners, getting 5,000 signatures from over 20 different schools, and demonstrated how you really can do that, and you contact people with power. And usually it's not politicians. Usually it's in that particular case, it was the Landmarks Preservation Commission, and, you have to have people on the committee since the Mayflower landing. And so anyways, this is just one example, but there's so many examples where he would help people, or help his students rather, to discover what's interesting for them and release them. And one of the things he's famous for is having a full day of independent study. This is what he would have students do one day a week, where he would release them from the classroom and they would go to the library. They would go walk around the city, like, do a perimeter walk, go study comics. He had students who were interested in comic book writing. He said, well, go down to the library, study the professional way to write comics, and do that on your own. And so I actually just spoke to him, and I said, let's call that the Gatto Day. A day of self-exploration, of independent study. That's a Gatto Day. When you're able to do that, because what's interesting is I started an organization, and it was from an event, but the long and short of it was that it was the first time somebody was like, okay, David, what are you interested in? Why don't you select the project? We'll provide some of the guidance and support behind achieving this goal. And weekly we'll check in. And it took me 30 years to get that invitation. So the whole idea is that we want to allow students to direct themselves. And I think the term for the next decade, two, and in the future is self-directed learning. And that's what John Gatto promoted for over 30 years, and even now in his ripe old age of 79.
So is it even possible, David Rodriguez, to have self-directed learning without not being homeschooled? I mean, aren't the schools so structured now that if a teacher did what John Gatto did and gave him a day off, I mean, wouldn't they just get called on the carpet immediately and just said, well, you can't do that?
Absolutely. And that's so true, is that there's so much coercion in the schools. I mean, you have 7 classes approximately a day, and the schools dictate what's studied. And there's a lot of speeches, on his YouTube channel that
Sure.
I've uploaded so people can listen. But he said, what I did was fully illegal. And he would tell the commissioners, because there was so much recognition and productivity in his classroom, people were coming around saying, man, what are you doing? They started a large, like a farmer's market type fundraiser for the school. And so these people were coming around to say, man, John, what are you doing? He said, if I told you what I'm doing, I'll get in trouble. And so that's why he ended up quitting at his final year. He said the political pressure got too much, and he wanted to use his platform to go out and speak about what schooling actually does, and utilize that very prestigious title of State Teacher of the Year. So it is possible, Patrick, for self-directed learning to happen. It's very hard unless the parents are involved and actively inquiring of the students. And one of the best questions parents can ask is to their son and daughters, what do you want? What do you want to learn? What are you interested in? What excites you? What kind of makes you, get your blood going and get this, great enthusiasm in your world, and pursue that. And perhaps that'll go for 2 or 3 months, and it will change, and it'll go from music to, science and exploration and astronomy. And the key thing is that when you force somebody to be in a classroom for 12 years and you don't ask them, hey, what are you interested in? And I mean, that's the real issue. And so that's why I no longer refer to schooling as public schooling. It's forced schooling. And my mother was a teacher for 20 years, Patrick. I have cousins who are teachers and principals now, today. So it's not the people in the system, but it's been scientifically designed so that there are reactions to authority. And there's a really incredible source document that folks, if they really want to get into it, they can see. It's called Principles of Secondary Education, published in 1918 by Alexander Inglis, the well-known professor from Harvard, very influential in the development of schooling. And so that's the hope, is that we can get this information out. Parents can see the reality for what it is, and it's hard to accept that, man, because I went to public school, but when you see the fact, you say, man, this thing was scientifically designed. So that's the kind of the foundation of it. And then once you see it for what it is, my recommendation and John's recommendation is pull them out of school immediately. And it doesn't have to be homeschooling. There's something called democratic schooling is very interesting. Some charter schools are okay, but still you're dealing with forced attendance. And the the subtitle is the intimate investigation into the prison. And so
Okay,
that's really hard to.
your Skype there just won't walk you for a second. The intimate investigation of what?
The intimate investigation of the prison
Huh.
of modern schooling.
The prison of modern
And
schooling. David Rodriguez is with us. If you have question, comments, come on in. 888-663-6386. Email Patrick at oneradionetwork.com. He's republishing the classic book, Dumbing Us Down, The Underground History of American Education and Weapons of Mass Instruction by John Taylor Gatto, coming out the end of August or the end of June or I get it, the end of July or August. Patrick Timpone, it is 16 June. So I wonder, what probably goes on a lot is dads and moms tell the kids, you have to do this, and I want you to get A's, otherwise I'm going to keep you in your room, whatever, and there's some kids do that, right? They do that because their moms tell them to, and they think that that's cool.
right.
but even at that, I mean, do we know, are they really learning anything, or are they just remembering facts, dates, and stuff? I mean, it's been so long since I've been to school, I just don't know what goes on there.
Yeah, a lot of it is testing, and the reality about that is that it's has to do with money. So the school districts are judged, evaluated on their test scores. So based on your test scores, you're distributed funds from the state, and also teachers are evaluated themselves on the test. So do you want to have low testing students or high testing students to demonstrate your proficiency as a teacher? Naturally, they teach to the test, and who designs the test? Well, now it's the state, and the whole movement here with Common Core is now you're going to have a test which isn't even designed by your state capital. It's going to be designed by the national federal capital there in Washington, D.C., where the parents have no control because it's centralized in the whole nation there. So it's about obedience, it's about memorization, and that's it's just the way that it is now, and that's what the book talks about, the underground history of American education.
Right, but even in homeschooling, David Rodriguez, do you not have to do some of the basic reading, writing, arithmetic stuff because you want the kids to pass some kind of a GED so they have a piece of paper, which our culture thinks is a good thing?
Yes, homeschooling is probably the best way to self-educate yourself, to pursue what you're interested in, and not waste 12 years in a classroom studying something which you're not interested in. So yeah, there is the GED. A lot of colleges actually prefer homeschooling students, and the reason is that they're self-motivated and they know what they like. And the colleges are not in the business of having people come in for a year or two and then drop out and do nothing. The colleges are in a business, and it's kind of like a branding situation. So there's also a great video where John talks about how to get into Harvard. And the long and short of it is that Harvard wants to admit people who are going to be famous or they're going to be wealthy. Why? Because if you become a 100 millionaire or a billionaire, guess what you're going to donate to their university? Funds. You're going to donate buildings. You're going to contribute to them. And then if you become famous, then it's like having the shirt Harvard or whatever Ivy League, very, very expensive university, wearing that logo on your back everywhere you go. And they have a very strict admission process where they actually can evaluate statistically if you're going to make a contribution to society and help them become more branded and known as a top university. So the actual application process, if you get accepted into those universities, then it's almost a shoo-in that you don't even need to attend. It's because if you get accepted, that means you're approved, and whatever you're going to contribute, you already have in your mind now. Now it's just a matter of kind of taking the next couple steps. So, yeah, you can get into universities. There's a book. I have a friend out here in California named Wes Beach who wrote a book called Self-Directed Learning and Life Stories. It just came out, and it's about his 50 years teaching, and he was also nominated for State Teacher of the Year. But he goes through documenting dozens of stories in his little school of what he did, and he would write transcripts and get it out to the university's community college. And so there are ways to do it where the student can pursue their interest and then get a piece of paper. And John always told his students, hey, if you do something significant and just get in a newspaper, make a little story, make a news clipping, by the time you're in freshman or sophomore, a good university will take you. If they can see that you have a future, he said, don't spend your time, in a classroom. If you find out that, by the time you're 15, 16, that you want to pursue comics or do
whatever,
become law school, yeah, you just apply, and they're like, wow, this young person's very ambitious, and they know what they want. We can count on them pursuing it and not wasting our resources, not wasting our chairs in the classroom. Yeah. And then when they graduate, we'll be the glorious institution which receives credit. So, yeah, that's how they would deal with that.
I see. It's 19 minutes after the hour. David Rodriguez, what do you think about this? 888-663-6386. Email Patrick at oneradionetwork.com. We're gonna talk to our jeans next hour and change them from blue jeans to red jeans.
Talk to Patrick now, 888-663-6386, or email Patrick at oneradionetwork.com.
Education. David Rodriguez is republishing the seminal work of John Taylor Gatto, one of the great thinkers on self-education. His book, Dumbing Us Down, The Underground History of American Education and Weapons of Mass Instruction. It's a school teacher's journey through the dark world of compulsory schooling, and it's being republished here the end of July or early August. David Rodriguez, let's talk a little bit about the history. I'm sure you know. I hope you do. If you don't, just tell me. But so when did this whole school thing start, where they decided to not homeschool and put the kids in a schoolhouse? And who was behind that? Was that a community thing, or was there something more sinister going on?
Yeah, it goes back as far as Plato, Patrick.
Wow.
And a lot of these utopians always were speaking about, if we want to create this type of society, whatever society they're promoting, we have to gain control of the minds of our students. So, yeah, there's records going back into Greece, Imperial China, and even into India. And the real precipice was in Prussian Germany in the early 1800s. And it was actually one of the key events was when Napoleon defeated the Prussians at the Battle of Jena, 1806. And there's a speech where this really influential philosopher named Johann Fichte, that's Fichte, made an address to the politicians of the day, and it's called the Addresses to the German Nations, where he goes and speaks about removing the imagination of the young people.
Wow.
And so, and the reason is that they, in a particular battle, there were the Prussians going into battle, being faced with Napoleon's forces, and naturally, when you're being shot at, your life is at risk. You have the natural reaction to leave the battlefield to protect your life.
That's right.
And so the politicians were saying, man, what can we do so that they will follow orders? And so it had to be regimented and remove that independent thought. And so that's what they wanted to do. it came over in the U.S. 1852 by Horace Mann, who was a very ambitious politician. And so he came over promoting the virtues of it. And in fact, he didn't even see the real active classrooms in Prussia. He just went over there when they were at a session, saw classrooms. So it was all political moves. And even up until the early 1900s, it was still being forced through. And a lot of the funding came from Carnegie, Rockefeller, who naturally they have interests in creating a population that doesn't become too productive,
and will follow orders and do what they say to do.
Correct. And in I think it was 1858, Abraham Lincoln described what the American dream was. And the American dream, is to have an independent livelihood. And that is being self-employed, being an entrepreneur, and those type of mentalities, those type of, attitudes and people are hard to control them, right? They're very hard to become consumers.
Yes.
They're very hard to become wage slaves, as it were. And so in the early 1900s, there was a term called overproduction, and this is a term dealing with people becoming too productive in terms of capital and business and entrepreneur. And the best example I can give you is, imagine that I am a manufacturer of VHS videos, and here you come, Patrick, manufacturing DVDs. If you come out of the shadows and I'm not paying attention, your technology, your innovation can make my business, my entire livelihood in business and investment, obsolete in a very short period of time. So you multiply that on a large scale nationwide, and this is what they're concerned about, because they don't want these upstarts creating solutions which can make their business obsolete. So they said, we have to control the overproduction of the masses, and the best way you can do that is by removing imagination from the young people. And so that's the dark part of it, is that they do have it in writings, and they say, one particular people will have a liberal education, but we don't need any more lawyers. We don't need any more poets, artists. We have plenty of that. We need people who are going to, turn the knobs, push the buttons, and they'll go home and buy the goods. And so it is. And it's, it can't be this huge conspiracy, but it is logically what happened and occurred. And so John documents that for his own benefits. And I was just visiting him. Actually, I visited him a couple times this year, but he goes through and he talks about, I had to find the resources for myself because I couldn't understand what was going on. And as I dug deeper and deeper, I saw that, okay, there are these characters who do want to remove the independence of the students and even self-alienation, what Edward Thorndike spoke about, 1915, 1918, around there. And piece by piece, you can see, this was very methodical, very scientific. And so that's how they're able to do that.
I suspect it could be argued as well, a little more spooky, but it sure makes sense to me, sitting here from the cheap seats, that politicians, kings, and whatever dictators from the beginning of time, one of their things, David Rodriguez said they did, was to get other people's stuff. Right? That's what they did for a living, right? You got a country, or you got gold, or whatever, and I want it. And if you have independent thinkers who really understanding what's going on in the world, you couldn't get them to fight, could you?
Correct.
You have to have people that, just like today, the kids have to believe that there are terrorists, right? There are people that want to kill us, and if we don't kill them, well, of course it's so I guess it's just kind of in the DNA or of the politicians and the power people to support this kind of schooling.
Correct. Yes, it's in their interest. Number one, because it kind of pacifies the populace, and so they can say, "Well, I voted for X candidate, so I did my duty," right? And so it kind of takes away that responsibility. But there's a gentleman who people, if they have interest, they can look him up. His name is George Hegel. That's Hegel, and he's famous for a lot of things. But one of it is called the Hegelian dialectic.
Oh yeah,
where you create the problem,
mm-hmm.
you know what the reaction is going to be, and you're going to provide the solution. And so that's a lot of what our populace of today can't handle because they're not taught to think dialectically, whereas dialectically is anything an authority tells you, you automatically distrust. Not because you think the authority person is evil, but because you know the nature of government, the nature of power, and power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolute, like Lord Acton says. And so if you have a population who thinks for itself, is independent, creative, enthusiastic, imaginative, and knowledgeable about themselves, then you're not going to be able to control them. And what politician is in support of this?
So this is nothing new, though. I mean, this goes back, as you say, this probably goes back, I don't know, 1,000 years, 2,000 years. This is what people in power have done for a long time.
Correct. The monarchs of the past have always wanted to control the people. Machiavelli wrote The Prince in the 1400s. And so it's always been controlling the people. Always the masses are a dangerous bunch of people. How do we control them? And it was only through Prussia and then the U.S. and many other countries now which use the force of law. And this is actually forcing you to attend. And if you don't, we'll fine you or fine your parents or imprison them. And
take your kids
that's
away.
The only way that this is the only way this whole system can be put together, because parents in the 1800s, they were not, clapping their hands and enthusiastically, great, let's take our kids away from the farm, at age 8, 9, and put them in a classroom and they can learn whatever the state wants them to learn. That's not what they're enthusiastic about. But nowadays, the education business is the largest business, directly or indirectly, in terms of employment for people around the country. And there's tenure benefits, and there's summers off, and there's all these great things. So it's really hard to have or to despise teachers because they don't know, and all of us have been propagandized, and it's like, okay, schools are good, schools are bad, and the contention that John has is that to really be self-educated, you have to have self-knowledge, and the school system with its bells, right? You get a bell every 40 minutes, doesn't allow you to get deep into a project, right? And that's why concentration, and you're naturally familiar with ADD and ADHD. I mean, this is a boon for the pharmaceutical companies who, you can have one particular student and they go to visit 3 or 4 doctors, and they're going to have 3 or 4 diagnoses: bipolar, ADHD, depressed, all these things. And so you start to see the profit margins of these pharmaceutical companies, and you can see that, wow, yeah, the kids are just being preyed upon, and trusting parents and trusting teachers, many of them don't see the reality, but there are a few who do, and it takes a lot of courage to speak up because you put your career on the line. Yeah. And John Gatto actually had his license revoked 2 years before he won the City and State Teachers of the Year because he went on vacation, went through the proper leave processes, and he came back after a couple months, and they said, "Oh, we're so sorry. Your license didn't get renewed, and it is no longer active, so you can't work for us anymore." And it was a very interesting story. What occurred, it was in the book, but he got it back, and then 2 years later, he got the City and the State Teacher of the Year's Award, State of the Year, Teacher of the Year, and So they wanted him out. They don't want him. They don't want people who go against the system, even though it's benefiting the kids. So the solution, and what parents should know, is that you should do your best to pull your kids out of school. And if you can't do it, then at least be involved and help them understand what's going on and explain to them, daughter or son, when you're in school, this is what's happening, and grades really don't matter much. If you go to apply to Harvard or Yale or these large institutions, they really don't care about your SAT or grades that much. What they want is they want somebody who is going to have a future, and if you can pursue your interests at age 10, 11, 12, then you can start coding, you can make any kind of interesting project, and there's so many stories now of people doing this, and I think one of the best ones is the co-founder of the Genome Project, Francis Collins, and he has a very interesting story, but he was completely unschooled. And unschooled is essentially homeschooling without any particular curriculum that the parents would buy. They basically decide on what they're going to study for this particular period of time, and then the students or the brothers would get together and study that, and when they got bored of that, they would change. But it wasn't like, okay, day 1 we're going to study this, day 60 this is what we're going to study, but it's kind of a going with the flow, going with your intuition and listening to yourself. And so that's what John would say is, pull your kids out if possible, and if not, just be involved. But the fact that you have to be in school from, let's say, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. without your free choice, that just shows you that your choice doesn't matter and your opinion doesn't matter, and you're going to have to wait until you're 17, 18 years old, and maybe you'll be able to pursue what you're interested in, but you'll likely follow, like I did. I went and got a business degree because that was the sign of success, and you spend 3, 4, 5 years doing that, and you come out 22, 24, and you say, okay, I'm ready to start my life, and it's harder at that point. You really want to do it at a young age because you're in tune with yourself, and you can more readily listen to what your interests are and not be filtered by, I should do this or I shouldn't do that, my parents, my teachers. The best way to do that is to listen to yourself, and that's what promotes.
I guess what I hear you saying, though, is there's no massive, organized, sinister agenda to keep America's not thinking. But it's maybe something that's gone on for so long that it's just kind of baked into the cake, and everybody, the teachers aren't bad people, or the doctors aren't bad people. This is just what they believe, right? You go there and they say you give high blood pressure, give them statin drugs, and this is what you do. And they're not bad docs. They're people. This is this what's been going on, or is there a sinister agenda, a bigger picture where people actually meet in dark rooms and say, okay, this is what we're going to do? And could Common Core be part of that?
Right. There are a lot of documents to demonstrate some sinister forces at play here. And the key thing is not the teachers. Teachers are actors in the play, and they think the play is real, but it's all kind of a charade, and the forces behind it realize that it's a matter of dumbing the population down. And this is even something that they wanted to do back in China, back in the old days. But there's a book called Tragedy and Hope.
Sure.
And that was done by Carol Quigley, and he goes through, and it's a big book, but he goes through and documents the kind of the papers that demonstrate that there are people, and they're, like I said, they're mainly Rockefeller, Carnegie. There's folks through Skull and Bones. Anthony Sutton wrote some great work. That's Sutton, speaking about their involvement. So there are sinister forces, and there's also a document called Agenda 21. This is from the United Nations. I believe it's in 1992. And the reality is these forces, these politicos, want a world government, and this kind of plays into that because you're just going to have people reacting to their problem, and here the solution is going to be world government. So if you have people who can think for themselves, then that's not going to happen. We want to make decisions locally, and that's one place to start, is to start participating in the local school board and start getting your voice out. But at some point, and I think we're at that point, where you're not going to make change by voting certain people into the school board and changing this and changing that. I mean, Common Core is this national curriculum. It's actually absurd that you could have people in Washington, D.C. creating curriculum for the whole nation without local input. I mean, if I had children, and Lord willing, one day I will have many, they're going to have problems with parents realizing that they don't control the curriculum, and these tests are essentially meaningless, and these students are stressed out. They're told, no, this test is so important, and your future and your college, and they even have some kindergartens where you have application processes to get into kindergarten because this kindergarten is the great one, and it's going to determine your future, and it's just a bunch of lies. And once you get the facts, I continually get emails from John's readers, and they just love what he has done because he's the voice. He's the guy, the whistleblower for the whole school system, the one with courage. And at the peak of his career, he said, I quit. I think for myself, I'm tired of hurting children. And actually, I just came across his tapes because after he got the State Teacher of the Year award, he held an event at Carnegie Hall in New York called The Exhausted School. Had Democratic speakers come, or Democratic schooling speakers, founders, homeschoolers, and I just got those audio, so I'm going to be uploading those soon here. So you can go to johntaylorgatto.com and find out more. But the talks are so powerful. He's so courageous, and so that inspires people. And there's so many well-known people, entrepreneurs, business people, who are fans of John and write him letters and are respecting what he's done, because it's not easy to be at the top and do that. And so after he did that Carnegie Hall event, he started getting speaking invitations from Apple computers and NASA and various countries around the world, because we all smell something wrong in Denmark, as it were, that, man, this is not right. I mean, learning should be fun. And one of the greatest quotes is from a gentleman named Buckminster Fuller, and he said, every child is a born genius. The challenge is, as they grow older, they become de-geniused, trying to please their teachers and please their parents, and that happens because they're no longer responding to themselves. They're no longer listening to their calling, and a lot of these young people at a young age, they can hear that calling, but if they're instructed that their voice doesn't matter, then they hold off and off they go on a life that a lot of times is unsatisfying because it's not something self-selected.
Mm-hmm. It's David Rodriguez, all about John Taylor Gatto and releasing his re-release of his book coming up in a couple months. And this is Patrick Timpone, June 16th, 2015. From Kate in Lexington, what is John Taylor Gatto's opinion? What did he talk about? And to this day write about the opinion of college education.
In general, college education was not something that he promoted, but he said sometimes you do need a degree or like a piece of paper, like a law degree. But he recommends a resource, and this would be the whole value of the call. If some listener hears this, there's a guide where you can actually do long distance learning, and it's called Bear's Guide to Earning Degrees by Distance Learning.
Bears, B-E-A-R-S?
Yes, sir, B-E-A-R-S, Bears, and it's published by 10 Speed Press. Mm-hmm. And this resource is a thick resource as well, and it instructs readers how to get a degree, generally at a third or at least half the price and sometimes half the time, but you still have the name of the college on that degree.
Really?
And so Yep, he realizes, sometimes you got to play the game, but the key thing is during the formative years, they shouldn't be stressed out about tests and worried about this particular, SAT or, going to college. But at some point, they might need that, and they can utilize this guide and get it at a low price. And on the degree, it doesn't say this was achieved by long distance learning. It just says this is the degree, and this is one of the huge resources that I picked up listening to him, and so that's how he would recommend.
Bear's Guide to Long Distance Learning. But there's not really, David Rodriguez, is there that many professions where you really need a piece of paper? Of course, the obvious ones are doctors, lawyers. I don't even know these days. What do you think? I mean, if you went to Apple or Google or somebody and you could prove that you could do this stuff even if you had nothing, you think you could get hired?
Absolutely.
Could you?
I would say probably a doctor would need a piece of paper.
Sure, of course.
In California, you can take the bar exam without a degree. So as long as you study
really?
up,
Can you really?
You can go out.
I'll be doing.
Take that bar degree. But in the real world, as you know, performance is the gauge. So what's more impressive is that if you can show up to your employer and say, look, Mr. Employer, here's my resume. I've done this project. I started this. I completed this. I got recognized for this. And, I want to come to your company and provide this kind of value. What do you say? And you can even start making requests. You can say, this is the amount I'm looking to earn. And good people are hard to find, so the smart company is going to say, a young person like you, you're going to be doing some good stuff. So why don't you come on board? We'll give you the whole package and, profit sharing. And that way you'll be locked in for 5 or 10 years with us and not working for our competitors.
Yeah, well, very interesting. Let's take a quick little break.
Nothing is more expensive than bad information. Know the source. OneRadioNetwork.com. Talk to Patrick now, 888-663-6386, or email patrick@oneradionetwork.com.
David Rodriguez talking about John Taylor Gatto's work, and his book is being republished, the big one, and we'll give you a title again. I've always liked that. Nothing is more expensive than bad information. David Rodriguez idea when it comes to health information and that. And you see there's $1.3 trillion of student loan debt out there. They're charging kids 25 to 50 grand a year, or not a year, for 4 years or whatever, even more, to go to school. And there's no place for them to go. I mean, there's not a lot of work here anyway, unless you're a self-starter, an entrepreneur, and doing what you're saying, right? I mean, this is where the jobs are.
Correct. The people going to universities and colleges who don't have an idea what they want to do for their future, I mean, my recommendation is don't go. Work at a job, make some money until you find out what your calling is, what your passion is, and then if a degree is necessary, you can pursue that. But one of the best solutions is to go find an internship or an apprenticeship. And how these work is that you find something you're interested in, go approach the person who you'd like to learn from, and you say, hello, sir, ma'am, I'm interested in learning your trade, learning this business. I don't know much, but I can volunteer, 2, 3, 4 hours a day, a week, and I'll come give you free labor. Would you be willing to share some of your experiences and know-how with me so that I can pursue this venture and make a career out of it? And who doesn't want free labor, right? I mean, you have to be polite and courteous and respectable and these kind of things. But the real, where the rubber hits the road, Patrick, is where people have to take responsibility for their life. And it's no one's responsibility to entertain us. We're not entitled to anything. Like you said, it's just a gift to be alive. And that's why I really am grateful for what you do with the health, because what is more valuable than your health? This is what nature or God has given us,
Right.
and it's valuable beyond measure. And it's a very interesting thought experiment I heard from a gentleman, and he said, if I gave you $5 million, let's say I lost my arm and I need your arm, would you pay me? Would you accept an offer of $5 million for your right arm? And I said, no,
No, I
I
don't
like
think
my
so.
right arm.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
This is valuable, right? So he kept going along, and he played the game, and he said, how about 250 million? I said, no. I said, this arm is mine. It's worth way more than that. And they said, okay, by that logic alone, your right arm's worth 250, your left arm's worth 250. Let's say your legs are worth the same. So right now, you are worth $1 billion in equity, right? Not cash, but equity. And so, yeah, your mind is included in that. I would say your mind's worth $1 billion too. But when we're not exposed to these things at a young age, we're just taught to consume. We're taught to accept whatever the authority tells us. If you have a white coat on, you have a funny hat, a funny badge, then you're the boss, and we have to listen to you. So the good news is that the information is getting out through the internet, YouTube, blogging, and there's people who are taking real action towards this. And so the action that we want to take is to withdraw kids from forced schooling. If that's impossible for the current situation of the family, parents be involved, help the child understand what's going on. But it is so unnatural for you to be forced by law, essentially gunpoint, to sit in a classroom for 12 years. And that's why John Gatto calls it prison.
Here's an email. Could David Rodriguez talk about how forced schooling is a eugenics program scientifically designed for 99% of the students to fail, according to John Taylor Gatto?
Yeah, so the eugenics program came from a gentleman named Francis Galton, who is a relative of Charles Darwin. And so what is unknown about many of these people is that these guys were highly wealthy. And as I mentioned earlier, Machiavelli wrote The Prince, and this is a guide on political control for 500 years. And so eugenics has to do with separating classes, and this class is better than the wealthy class, the elite class are better than everyone else. And I mean, eugenics, I think this is in the 20s or the 19-teens, where they were forcibly sterilizing people based on their history, their family history. And this, thankfully, is no longer going on, but there's people who are still connected with eugenics. And I believe the father of Bill Gates was connected with the eugenics program, and I believe in Planned Parenthood is a kind of a company changed their name. So it is. There's class warfare going on, and it is a tool. Forced schooling is a tool by the elite to separate the dangerous masses from them. And if they can get the scientific foundation, which Darwin spoke about, and there's also an interesting resource from Darwin called The Descent of Man, where he talks about there being over 50 types of races. And so he goes into that, and at the bottom of it, Irishmen or Scottishmen, they're at the bottom, and they're unhelpable. You can't do anything about them, and it's too bad. So it is. There's class warfare. There's big thinkers who have thought deeply about doing this. They want to promote self-alienation and removing imagination. And the essence of it is that they want to manage your life a lot of times without you knowing it. So whether it's eugenics or psychological warfare, there's a program called MK Ultra, which is just dark and terrible that people can look into. But it's a good reason for parents to learn the facts. And when we are discussing these things, because it's such just an unfathomable thing, like who would pray among our children, I'm always just aware to not condemn teachers and not condemn ignorance, because I wasn't always aware of this information. I just felt something was wrong. And you grew up at a different time, Patrick, but so did John Gatto, and he was being instructed in the works of Marcus Aurelius when he was in junior high school, reading the Gaulic Wars by Julius Caesar. This is a manual for how to divide and conquer. And that's essentially what's happening now. They're using the ignorance of the masses of the U.S., and they're dividing and conquering us and having us fight over petty issues, when in reality, we would all benefit by creating alliances with each other, because the war is on, free humanity. And as a health professional and someone who's into that world, already. The American Medical Association and all these ties to money, and there's all these various interests, and the patient or the student a lot of times are the last one on the list.
Yeah. It's so can you just go over some of the organized schools that, if mom and dad's listening, want to go there, say I just can't homeschool, would they be the Montessori's, the Waldorf schools, those kind of schools? Are they worth looking at?
They are. And that was one reason that I started an organization called Education Options, and people can see more about it, educationoptions.org. And the purpose of that organization is to empower parents who want to learn about different options. Because mom and dad are busy, cleaning house, working, feeding the baby,
sometimes
walking the dog.
both parents are working, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And so they're busy. And if you're working hard 5 days a week and you have 1 or 2 hours a night, maybe, to hang out with your spouse, hang out with your kids, on the weekends you want to go on, vacation, then when are you going to start researching schools and visiting schools and talking with people? It's such a mental obstacle for parents. It's easier, subconsciously or not, to say, you know what, we live in a good school district, the scores are high, our child's going to be okay. So I have an event coming up for March 2016 in San Jose, and there'll be an unschooling lady there. There's a really interesting model your listeners might really enjoy called AgileLearningCenter.com from New York. They'll be coming in as well, and they use the philosophy of the Agile software. So that's really interesting. There's something called Democratic Schools, which my friend Jerry Mintz in New York, educationrevolution.org, promotes. And there's a school. Actually, if you want to get some good weekend movie watching, there's a free movie on YouTube called Summerhill.
Summerhill?
2000. Summerhill, about a school in the UK. It's been around for 80 years. Really good production. And you can learn about democratic schooling, and the godfather of that, his name was A.S. Neal, available online. You have Montessori, Maria Montessori, great story behind her. Definitely consider those schools. And I think what parents should do is just begin researching and start at those areas. I think Montessori is a good place to start. They have thousands of Montessori schools around the world. A lot of them are good, and some of them just use the name as a marketing tool. So they're not really following her philosophy, which is listen to the child. The child has natural instincts, and so you want to guide the child naturally where they're going.
So you have to be careful
those
there.
Are good ones. Yeah.
Well, David, we got to run. We're out of time, and I really appreciate it. So it's called Dumbing Us Down, The Underground History of American Education and Weapons of Mass Instruction. It's going to be released at the end of July or August. The website is johntaylorgatto.com, correct?
Correct, johntaylor.com. And if you go there, there's a free article called Advice from Harvard, 10 Skills for Success in the Global Economy, which John wrote just within the last year. So if you go there, you can just enter your email address, and we'll make sure you get that article. And yeah, it'll probably come out, let's say end of July, early August, The Underground History of American Education. This is the magnum opus of John Taylor Gatto, one of the most powerful voices in education today.
Good job. Thanks so much. Excellent. We appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Patrick. Look forward to speaking to you again.
Bye-bye.
get like that.